The Cannabis Heals Me podcast, episode 109.
You're listening to the Cannabis Heals Me podcast, where we explore the real stories of real people who have discovered the profound healing properties of the cannabis plant in their own lives. Find more at cannabishealsme.com.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Cannabis Heals Me podcast. This is your host, Rachel Kennerly, and we're coming to you once again from the Storybook Inn Studios. Thank you so much for tuning in every week. We really appreciate everybody that listens to the show every week when we put out the episodes. If you haven't done so already, we would even more appreciate, well, no, not even more, but we would really appreciate you also going out and giving us a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. And the reason we ask you to do that is because it is a free way for us to promote the show. The podcast app you're using will actually recommend us to other people who are listening to similar type programs. So if you give us a rating or review, we would certainly appreciate that. If, like me, you have always dreamed, or at least within the last year and a half, have dreamed of owning a Cannabis Heals Me podcast t-shirt, you're in luck because my buddy Dan Reed took our logo and put it on some t-shirts, and he's got that available on his Teesprings website. I've got a quick and easy link for you. If you just go to cannabishealsme.com/swag, SWAG, that will take you directly to that site. So if you're interested in owning a Cannabis Heals Me podcast t-shirt, go out to cannabishealsme.com/swag and pick yours up today. Our guest today is Melanie Julion. Melanie is a cannabis doula, and I wanted to have her come on and talk a little bit more about just the use of cannabis during pregnancy in general. We had Delene's story on Monday telling her personal experience with cannabis use during pregnancy, and just wanted to get somebody to come on and share more than just one experience. So Melanie joins me to talk about that on today's episode. Welcome to the program. I'm glad you agreed to talk to me today.
Thank you.
It's an interesting topic and one that is a little controversial, I'm sure.
Yes.
So I wanted to have you on and just kind of tell us what a cannabis doula is, and maybe start off just telling us, well, what does a normal doula do?
Yes. So a doula provides emotional, physical, and mental support for birthing families, usually during the pregnancy to postpartum period. And they also provide education, care, and support to families. In a wide range of care. There's doulas for everyone. So there's plenty types of doulas to fit various birthing styles and healthcare models, and just really supporting the woman and the family and the birth of that experience. It's a journey. So doulas provide a very great bridge of support between the parents, the care providers, and just that whole process of giving birth that women really need, support with.
Yeah, and so you're there during the pregnancy, but then you don't just go away after the birth. It sounds like you kind of stick around and help afterwards, right?
Yeah, so most doulas usually stick around from the prenatal period, so antepartum, through to childbirth and to postpartum as well, anywhere from what we call the fourth trimester, so the 30 to 60 days after the baby is born.
Okay, well, that's nice because you need just as much support then as you do before the baby gets there.
Definitely. So as a doula, I've been supporting birthing families who choose to consume cannabis, whether they're pregnant or during the postpartum or even during childbirth as well.
As a cannabis doula, what do you do that's different? Just work with moms that use cannabis, or is there any other special things that you do?
Yeah, so for me specifically, I am also a hypno doula. So I support women who also choose to use hypnosis as a form of pain management during childbirth. I use hypnosis for both of my pregnancies and childbirthing experiences. So I'm a big advocate for holistic and alternative methods for supporting women during pregnancy and childbirth. So I act more as a holistic doula, really supporting the mind, body, and spirit of, the birthing experience. It's a really tremendous journey that women go on. And so cannabis can really aid in that process and really support women during that time. And it has been used traditionally as an alternative to supporting women during childbirth and pregnancy. a lot of the women that I work with are kind of in that same, mindset of using cannabis traditionally as a holistic health aid, an alternative to other medications used during childbirth and pregnancy.
Hey guys, wanted to tell you real quick about our podcast host and sponsor, Anchor.fm. If you're thinking about starting your own podcast, I highly recommend Anchor. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. They'll distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go out to Anchor.fm to get started. That's Anchor.fm. Now back to the show. Mm-hmm. So what sort of training does one get before becoming a doula? And then what sort of training have you had in addition for the cannabis portion of your doula?
So doulas usually have like a weekend or longer training depending on the doula organization. So I'm donor trained doula. I've also had training and certification by Hypno Babies, which is a hypnosis childbirth education program. But my background, I actually have a background in a Bachelor of Science in Family and Child Studies with an emphasis in family social services. So I've been working with families in a variety of settings for quite some time and really creating innovative programs to support the communities and families that I work with. So bringing all of that together, I went through my doula training. I also have been trained by Lamaze Childbirth Education. I love childbirth education. I'm really passionate about childbirth education. Being able to bridge the cannabis education and the childbirth education together has been an absolute pleasure for me. I have a master's certification from Cannabis Training University, but prior to getting that certification, I actually worked at a medical cannabis cultivation center when I was pregnant with my first child. So that's kind of how all of this got started. My experience being pregnant, working there and consuming cannabis, and the stigma that I experienced from that, but also having access and knowledge to the healing benefits of cannabis was very empowering for me as a pregnant person. We were growing for mostly pediatric patients, so I had no fears about it potentially hurting my child. So I was very empowered in my cannabis use. And so I went on to work as a intake specialist for a doula organization and kind of got mixed up into the maternity health care aspect of it all. And it was an amazing experience. I was talking to a lot of women doing health assessments, asking them about their drug use during pregnancy. A lot of them were consuming cannabis for very severe nausea and vomiting during pregnancy. Most of them were also prescribed other options, other pharmaceuticals that weren't helping them at all, and cannabis was the last resort for them. And so me, of course, I was pregnant at the time. I was also consuming cannabis, but I couldn't tell them that because I was working for this specific organization. I couldn't advise them on their cannabis consumption or anything like that. So eventually I started my own doula solo practice, supporting families so that I could tell them, support them in this way. Because I was, becoming very passionate about it. I went on to finally become a medical cannabis patient in my state. It took a very long time for me to become a patient. But, that allowed me to be more vocal about my experience now that I had safe access. And I had 2 very pleasant, blissful birthing experiences using cannabis for pain management, for severe nausea and vomiting during pregnancy. I had used other holistic measures as well that I incorporated during my pregnancy to support a natural birth and a very great postpartum experience for the most part. A lot of women experience postpartum depression and things like that cannabis can be very useful for a lot of women as an alternative to these prescription drugs that can be very addictive and harmful to breastfeeding mothers. So yeah, I'm here and supporting women. I've been able to support women from all over who are from communities who have traditionally used cannabis. As I mentioned, cannabis has been used since the earliest known uses of the plant, for childbirth and for supporting women during pregnancy for a variety of conditions. You name it, there's a preparation of cannabis for it. It can be used safely. So I've been supporting women in safely consuming it. I have a certification as a professional interpreter with the Trichome Institute. So I incorporate a lot of strategies and methods for safely consuming cannabis and choosing quality cannabis, making sure you're choosing cannabis that's from a safe source, no bugs, no pesticides and things like that. So it's been very useful to the women and families that I work with. I've hosted events in the community, getting women out, talking about cannabis, consuming cannabis, teaching them these interpreting tools and tips, and it's been an amazing experience. I'm currently wrapping up our holistic cannabis consumption, pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum online course, where we've been reaching women and providing them with harm reduction, risk management, education that's evidence-based on childbirth education, family life education, and cannabis education. So it's been great. I've been able to combine all of my passions together. And it's been very impactful so far.
That sounds awesome, because whenever you mention cannabis use, period, the feedback that you get is, oh, there's no studies. And so I'm sure you get that even like a trillion-fold when it comes to people who are pregnant and want to use it.
Yes, of course. So that's a very big, important part of what we do, is getting information and education out about the research behind it. Of course, it's very limited. A lot of the current research is biased, but there are some very important studies and articles out there that can really help women making informed decisions about cannabis. So while their research is limited, there is research available that is very useful. A lot of it has been put together and eloquently researched and researched for a very long time by Dr. Ethan Russo. So there's a lot of information out there available to families, and I'm just hoping to get that information out and to really shatter the stigma, because like you said, there's a lot of conversation on cannabis use during pregnancies. So, yeah.
Yeah, one of my first interviews that I did for the show was with a lady named Ashley. She has complex regional pain syndrome, which is like a nervous condition where you feel like you're on fire. And so she was using cannabis for that, and she moved to Colorado so that she could get access to the plant. And when she was pregnant, she was still consuming cannabis, because it's not like this condition goes away when you're pregnant. Right. And she thought, okay, I'm in Colorado, everything's cool. And when her doctor found out that she was using cannabis, they were very like, oh no, don't do that.
Yes. They're doctors. That's another thing. You have to know how to talk to your doctors about your cannabis consumption. That's another thing that we talk about. And I encourage women and families to talk to your doctors about cannabis, and find a doctor who supports cannabis and who's knowledgeable about cannabis medicine, and can really help you with your use. That's very important.
Now, you're in a legal state. Now, I myself, I'm not. And, there's, half the country doesn't have real access to legal cannabis. So I guess you kind of have to be a little careful there, because you could run into some legal problems.
Yes.
If you're using in a state that it's not legal.
Yes. So that's one of the things that we talk about as well when we talk about safe access for families. You want to make sure you have safe access to the cannabis that you're consuming, especially if you're pregnant, if you have children. You don't want to risk, Child Protective Services getting involved in your situation. So that's one thing to always be mindful of, making sure you have safe access.
Yeah. Now, obviously, having CPS interaction in your life is never a good thing. What are some of the other? Well, let's talk first about the benefits, and then we'll talk about other risks. So, one of the ladies that, because like I said, I posted on my wall saying, "Hey, what should we talk about? What sort of questions should I ask?" And one of the ladies who had posted, she said that she had hyperemesis
Oh,
when
yeah.
she was pregnant, and none of the traditional medications worked, and
Mhm.
cannabis was a lifesaver for her.
Yep.
So what are some of the things that you have used in your practice, or women that you've worked with in your practice have used cannabis to help with?
So hyperemesis is one of the major things. Severe nausea and vomiting.
Hmm.
It can be very uncomfortable, life-threatening. So helping women to eat is one of those things that cannabis can help with, and just really controlling the gag reflex. That can be really, really. It really affects women during the course of pregnancy. A
Hmm.
lot of women. So that's a big thing. Insomnia, pain management, of course, that's a big thing as well. Anxiety and depression during pregnancy and after pregnancy. Of course, pain management during childbirth and anxiety and fear during childbirth. It can also support women during breastfeeding and helping increase lactation, helping minimize engorgement and swelling. In certain conditions, it can even prevent lactation as well. So, stopping lactation for women who need to or are interested in stopping lactation. It can work either way in various preparations. I mentioned postpartum depression as
Hmm.
well. That's a very big thing. So other postpartum mood disorders as well. So postpartum OCD and other conditions, cannabis can be very useful in managing hormonal changes, mood swings during that time, managing our hormones, even supporting hemorrhage, preventing hemorrhage during the postpartum period right after birth. That's really important. And obviously, it supports minimizing those period cramps, those cramps and uterine contractions that can happen.
Hmm.
They're especially painful after birthing two or more babies. So cannabis can be very helpful in those conditions and also be an alternative, as a healthier alternative to pharmaceutical drugs.
So during the birthing process, you could actually use cannabis to control your pain as opposed to
Oh,
getting a.
absolutely. Cannabis, a much safer alternative to opioids that are
Hmm.
offered to pregnant and birthing women. Opioids can have a lot of effects on the newborn, but cannabis has been shown to have no effects. It can actually support neural development in the infant and really charging up and supporting the endocannabinoid system in both mom and baby and supporting homeostasis. So, in a variety of methods of consumption, cannabis can be very useful as an alternative, a safer alternative, especially.
Yeah, I would think is cannabis would be better, like you said, than the opioids, which.
Yes, yeah. Women are being prescribed opioids during pregnancy. It's often the only resort the only option that pregnant women have for pain management and even for severe nausea, vomiting, depression, all of these conditions
Mhm.
that women need support with. We rely on those pharmaceutical medications, and they're often dangerous to the birthing person and to the nursing newborn, the baby's nursing, or even if the baby's in the womb, it can have some effects as well, like opioid withdrawal symptoms in the baby.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, that's a lot of times women aren't told these effects because it's the only option, and a lot of people feel, a lot of doctors, a lot of organizations feel maternal depression is far worse than actually the effects of these medications. So that's something to be mindful of, that these medications do have harmful effects that really show up in the form of like colic like symptoms in the
Mhm.
newborn. Very distressful, irritable newborns, hard to breastfeed, and it can be a real challenge for the new parents. who aren't, aware or, aren't knowledgeable of these symptoms. So that's something to be mindful of. And the epidural can produce these same effects.
Interesting.
Yeah,
but they're probably not going to run down the list of those side effects with you before they have you sign off on it.
Right, exactly. But they are there.
Yeah. Now, when you're breastfeeding and you're consuming cannabis while breastfeeding, I'm assuming you're going to pass some of that through to the baby in breast milk. Yes. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So THC does pass to the breast milk, and it's stored in fats. So it's not like a pump and dump thing that you can do with alcohol. It will stay in your breast milk and will be passed to your baby. It's only a very fractional percentage of THC that's passed to the baby, and there's still very limited research on the effects and actually how much, gets passed through breast milk. So there's still a lot of research that's needing to be done, research that obviously can be done for a lot of moral reasons, but that is something to be mindful of. If you have concerns about consuming cannabis or passing THC to your baby if you're breastfeeding, women do have the option of, stopping when they're breastfeeding. And some women choose to do that. It's your choice, your comfort level, making sure you're knowledgeable and making informed decisions based on your own comfort and your family's comfort with your, cannabis use.
Have you seen a shift in doctors' attitudes towards women consuming cannabis during pregnancy, or do they, for the most part, still consider it a no-no?
It really depends. There are some doctors who are very supportive. Some doctors, some OBs, midwives especially, are prescribing writing certifications for pregnant women who have hyperemesis and severe nausea, pain, and are supportive of women who are consuming cannabis during pregnancy. Those doctors may be harder to find, but there are obviously some doctors, many doctors, most doctors even, who are just like, no, you can't do it. It's not safe in any regard. And a lot of them are working for hospitals and organizations who have these same feelings, and for whatever reason, they can't break the law and say, even if they personally believe it, even if they personally consume it, they can't say it because of, the contracts they have, what they work for. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Now, we've talked about the benefits of cannabis use during pregnancy. What are some of the risks that people should be aware of?
So obviously the risks that we've been discussing as far as legal implications, if you're consuming in a state that's, not supportive of cannabis use at all, medicinally or recreationally, that's a risk that you face. As a parent who's consuming cannabis during pregnancy, being reported to Child Protective Services is a risk. Women have had their child taken away or, investigated for cannabis use. So that's a risk. As far as long-term health effects of the child, there's obviously research associating cannabis use with adverse behavior in adolescents, I'll say like that. Or ADHD in adolescents. Those research studies aren't conclusive. There's still a lot of research that has to be done, but there has been no immediate long-term risks associated with cannabis. In fact, with Dr. Melanie Julion, the outcome of her study, the Jamaican study, as a lot of women are familiar with. It's a very important study to look at when we're talking about long-term cannabis use and the effects. She actually found that mothers who consumed cannabis or marijuana during pregnancy actually had greater neonatal outcomes within the first hour or so after birth. There was no negative behavior risks associated with those children, any differences in those children versus any other children after the first 5 to 6 years. So as far as health risks are concerned, there aren't any, but there are ways to reduce harm when we're consuming cannabis. So making sure you have quality cannabis, making sure you know what you're consuming, making sure you know the labels and are being mindful of your consumption, being intentional with your consumption is very important. Obviously, we know that not all cannabis is quality. And so when you're consuming cannabis, when you're pregnant, it's very important. It's of the utmost importance to make sure that you are consuming quality cannabis that hasn't been tarnished in any way. And a lot of times when we're buying black market cannabis in illegal places or states who haven't, have medical programs that offer access to pregnant people, it's very challenging to get clean cannabis, organic quality flower.
What are the main consumption methods for women who are pregnant? Because we hear you're not supposed to smoke tobacco. So does the same kind of go for cannabis or?
So yeah, there are a variety of consumption methods for women. There are a lot of options for women who are pregnant. I definitely don't recommend consuming cannabis or marijuana with tobacco. We know that tobacco has negative effects on the newborn, and a lot of these risks that we see associated with cannabis may be from the addition of tobacco. So making sure you're not consuming tobacco in any way, pouring no blunt papers or spliffs or anything like that. But obviously, inhalation is a very popular method, either rolling joints or vaporizing. Cannabis is an option, a safer option if you are consuming it by smoking it. Vaping is a great option. Dry flower vaping. Also, bath bombs and topicals are great options for getting those cannabinoids in for minimizing pain and anxiety and depression, things like that, those mood boosters. Also, cannabis tea is a great option. Even juicing cannabis leaves during pregnancy is a great option and very nutritious. So, getting a variety of options in that doesn't necessarily have to be smoking it during pregnancy. Like you said, is very good during pregnancy for women who are interested in consuming.
Now, if you're consuming cannabis, if you get high while you're smoking cannabis during pregnancy, well, does your baby experience those same effects in utero, or do we know that?
So how do we know that? So obviously there's still research that needs to be done, but we know that just based off how the cannabis is consumed in the mother and how much is passed to, well, it does actually go to the placenta. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But we don't know how much or how it affects the newborn. So there's still research that needs to be done in that regard, but we know that the endocannabinoid system regulates the placenta's functioning and the strength of the placenta. So making sure that we have an intact and healthy endocannabinoid system during pregnancy can really help support healthy pregnancy, healthy birthing functions. So that's something to keep in mind. The endocannabinoid system, even when an infant as small as 2 cells, has a functioning endocannabinoid system, which helps with the neural development and other physiological developments during pregnancy. So it's been said that cannabis can really aid in that process and can support that process, especially if the mother is deficient in endocannabinoids, making sure obviously that she's safely consuming cannabis and talking to her doctor obviously about it. There are obviously doctors who are specialized in endocannabinoid therapy. So I always recommend families look for those type of doctors who are knowledgeable and who can support them in finding the right products for them, because obviously we know that every woman is different. Every pregnancy is different. And even with cannabis, all of our consumption looks different. What works for someone may not work for anyone. There's obviously tinctures available for women, salves and gummies and roll-ons. There's patches. There's so many options. So it just really depends on the mother, her comfort level, and what she's safe or comfortable with consuming, and what her doctor is saying, really, and what her partner is saying. All these things play a part in safe consumption for the mother.
Breast milk has, even for people who aren't consuming cannabis, have cannabinoids, correct? They're naturally occurring.
Absolutely. And they actually help the baby to suckle. They help the baby to be eager and excited to consume and eat their food. And that's very important. The baby needs breast milk. So it does have those natural endocannabinoids, 2AG, that we make naturally in our bodies.
Interesting. And I think most of us were probably completely unaware of that until up to,
Yes.
just recently.
And THC perfectly mimics these cannabinoids.
Yeah.
So that's why they say that THC, the mother who consumes it can support her baby in, nursing and lactation. So that's where that comes from. And, cultures, ancient practices, ancient medical practices have been using cannabis to support that for a long time, either using hemp seeds or various preparations, to support lactation.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been very interesting and very informative. I hope the listeners agree. Now, you had mentioned earlier that you actually have a excuse me. I don't have coronavirus. I just have a frog in my throat.
I know. I feel like we have to say that now, like when we talk something.
But you were mentioning earlier that you actually have a course that you teach on this. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes. So the Holistic Cannabis Consumption, Pregnancy, Childbirth, and Postpartum online course. It's a 7-week course. I created it for this very purpose, to educate families, to help families make informed decisions about cannabis based on evidence-based information on childbirth and cannabis. We talk about the ancient and traditional methods and practices of consuming cannabis during pregnancy to postpartum. Also, other holistic measures and alternatives that can be incorporated during pregnancy to support a natural birth. So it's been very enlightening. We talk about the endocannabinoid system. We talk about the cannabis plant, obviously, tying all of that in with how the endocannabinoid system, functions during childbirth, and how cannabis can be used as an alternative to pharmaceutical drugs that are offered during pregnancy, to postpartum as well. So it's a lot of amazing information, a lot of herbal remedies, a lot of holistic frameworks and risk management frameworks that we use to support families. So it's an online course right now. We're hoping to do workshops and with dispensaries and hospitals, really hoping to shatter the stigma and have conversations that support families who are consuming, cannabis as medicine, because cannabis is medicine. It can be used to support women and families during pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum. So we kind of have to reframe our language around cannabis use, because we know that a lot of organizations report cannabis as an illicit drug that's used by pregnant women. And that's, the statin that we know. But it's also an ancient and traditional medicine used to support pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum. So there's a lot of research. We talk about Dr. Ethan Russo and a lot of the research in the ancient traditional practices that have been, written from, centuries ago until now. So it's a very enlightening course. Parents, doulas so far have been enrolled, nurses as well. Mm-hmm. When we really are hoping to shatter the stigma, because, it has to be done, and it's exciting to do in this time that we're in.
Yeah. Well, if folks want to go check that out, where can they do that? Do you have a website for it?
Yes, absolutely. So you can go to the cannabisdoula.org, check out the classes. I also offer consultations. You can follow the Cannabis Doula on Instagram at the Cannabis Doula. Definitely stay connected, because there's going to be so many awesome things happening. As soon as we can start happening again,
right.
We'll have some more events. We had a lot of incredible sessions, partnering with woman-owned brands, and just doing a lot of awesome stuff, centering women's cannabis consumption. So it's been awesome. And I definitely, welcome people to come join a course or schedule a consultation if you want to learn more.
Okay. Well, in these days of social distancing and being stuck in your house, it seems like a pretty good time to take the course.
Absolutely. We definitely do online sessions as well. We had an online sesh, a virtual sesh, just talking about family preventative wellness, preventative health with cannabis, and family wellness, and we've had other cannabis consuming mothers come on and talk about their experience with cultivation and using cannabis during pregnancy, and it's just been very awesome. I'm hearing these experiences and sharing them with other people. So I'm very excited to continue doing this work and sharing it with everyone.
Well, this is great. Like I said, consuming cannabis is something that you kind of have to hide. And then if you bring in the fact that you're doing so during pregnancy, then you have to go like inside the closet to do that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But it's been happening, for a very long time. I've had a lot of older women even who were pregnant in the 60s and 70s reach out to me saying they consumed when they were pregnant, and they're so excited about the work that I'm doing to get more information out to families. So we definitely have to have this conversation more. So I thank you for having me on.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. I'll make sure I put links in the show notes page today to your social media sites and then also to your website, so that folks want to go check that course out and you can follow the work that you're doing on social media. Yeah. Maybe one of these days when life returns to some semblance of normalcy, then we'll be able to do some more of the face-to-face type stuff.
Definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Melanie. This has been very educational, and I hope at a minimum it starts the conversation so that people aren't afraid to talk about it now and be open about it.
Yes, it's definitely okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and hope everything goes well up where you are. And
thank you. You as well.
Yeah. Maybe the craziness will subside just a little.
Yes, definitely crossing my fingers, sending out, healing vibes to everyone who needs it.
Well, thanks a bunch, Melanie. I appreciate you coming on and talking to me.
Thank you. No problem.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Show notes for today's episode can be found out at cannabishillsme.com/109. I don't know if we'll have an episode next week. You would think with everybody being home for coronavirus that there would be people, lined up to speak to me, but I've had a little trouble getting people on the schedule to get them to talk to me about their personal cannabis experience. So if you know of anybody that would like to share their personal medical cannabis experience, I'd love to hear from them. You can reach out to me on Facebook, or you can send me an email, podcast@cannabishillsme.com. But this show is driven by the interviews and the people I talk to. And without people to share their story, then there's really no show. So if you know someone who wants to share a story, have them reach out to me. We'll get something scheduled. But we probably won't have an episode next week. We'll be back here when we get back, but probably be the week after that. I am trying to get some stuff scheduled for next week. So we should have an episode week after next. But until I return, you guys be safe. And thank you again so much for listening and sharing the show. Have a great week. Hit the subscribe button and you'll never miss an episode of the Cannabis Heals Me podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or whatever podcast app you're using. Do you have a suggestion for a guest on Cannabis Heals Me? Send an email to podcast@cannabishealsme.com. We'd love to hear from you. Please do not take any information from Cannabis Heals Me or its guests as medical advice. Contact your licensed physician before taking cannabis or using it for medical treatments.